For my project, I read Fashionopolis, Why What We Wear Matters, written by Dana Thomas and reviewed by me, Lexie Smith. Fashionopolis was written in 2019 by a fashion and culture journalist named Dana Thomas. This book showcases the different sides of the fashion industry: fast fashion, sustainable fashion, and fashion from the perspective of the consumer. Thomas goes behind the scenes of the fast fashion industry to expose the horrific working conditions in sweatshops and the Made in the U.S. facade. In a similar fashion, Thomas goes behind the scenes of the sustainable fashion brands to show how they contrast from the production and fast fashion brands. Finally, Thomas explains to the reader the role they play in the fashion industry, why they should care about how their clothes are being made, and what they can do to assist in the fight for sustainable and ethically made fashion. The target audience for this book is 18 to 24-year-old people who have an interest in fashion and knowing where their clothes come from. Fashionopolis begins with Thomas's journey into the role of fast fashion brands in the fashion industry. Fast fashion retail brands have been involved with creative thievery since their origins in the 1990s. These brands include Zara and H&M, and they have been stealing the designs straight off the runway in order to keep up with the trends. Luxury designers lose major money off their designs because of this creative thievery, and there is nothing they can do about it. Despite trying to sue these companies, it typically falls through because they have too much money. The fast fashion industry also thrives off of unethical production based on the mentality of the faster the better. This mentality began with Richard Arkwright during the Industrial Revolution, and it became applied to clothing around the time of the Civil War. Clothing companies needed to produce mass amounts of clothing in order to fit the demand of the military, and over time it expanded to fashion as well. For the most part, factories and clothing production was ethical, made primarily in the United States. However, in the 1980s, with NAFTA and politics becoming involved in trade across nations, fashion brands quickly realized that producing clothing overseas was cheaper and in turn better for business. To finish off the first section of her book, Thomas recalls her visits to some of the deadly sweatshops in Bangladesh being used in the fast fashion industry. These sweatshops were all a part of the Rana Plaza, owned by a man named Sohail Rana. Because of this man and his unethical sweatshops, over 1,100 people died and more than 2,000 were injured. Some people were never found. These sweatshops made clothes for Zara, H&M, Disney, Walmart, Amazon, and more. These brands claimed they had no idea what was happening in the sweatshops, so they never were held accountable for their actions. This section of Fashionopolis dives into the world of sustainably made clothing and fashion brands, and it unveils a stark contrast from the fast fashion world. Most sustainable fashion brands do not set up shop in typical fashionable cities such as Los Angeles and New York City, rather in Nashville, Tennessee, where there is not a huge market for fashion. Nashville is the third biggest city for the fashion industry in the United States, and that is because of sustainable fashion. As the owners of these brands explain, it is easier to create a sustainable fashion industry out of Nashville than it is to rebuild the fast fashion industries already in place in the bigger fashion cities. Thomas talks to the owner of Alabama Chainin to get a closer look at how these clothing items are being made. Chainin explains that she hires local seamstresses, all women, who work on a freelance basis. If they don't want to work, they don't have to. Chainin also explains that her wages are so high because she pays her seamstresses a livable wage. A sustainable brand that is unlike any other is a brand called Reformation, founded by Yael Aflalo. Aflalo describes her brand as a sustainable fast fashion because they do often keep up with the trends and have new styles every couple of weeks. This works because Aflalo does not order a 1,000-item inventory. She only orders a small amount, and she will not order more clothing until the prior inventory sells out. Reformation is among one of the most well-known sustainable brands. The jean industry is also becoming more involved with the sustainable fashion industry. Most jeans contain synthetic indigo, which has a cancer-causing agent. However, there are people like Stony Creek Colors who are actively working towards creating affordable, organic denim. This side of the jean industry is rapidly growing. Big-name brands such as Levi and Strauss & Co. are becoming more involved with organically dyed jeans. In part 3 of her book, Dana Thomas works to directly invest the reader in the ways they can contribute to sustainable fashion. Thomas writes about a conversation with Stella McCartney, a luxury designer who is primarily concerned with sustainability and ethical production. In this conversation, Thomas asks McCartney the big money question: what do people do who can't afford to shop sustainably? McCartney replies with wait for the sale, or you can save of your money. She further explains that if you pay more for something, you are less likely to throw it away. Some fashion designers believe everyone should know how to make their own clothing items, and their brands sell items such as a kit with all the materials necessary to make a dress, a t-shirt, etc. By doing so, these companies are trying to bridge a gap between consumer and producer to show buyers the value of the clothes that they are buying. The jean industry is focusing on synthetic cotton in order to make jeans and other cotton items recyclable. If people could make their own clothes, custom to their liking, they would be less prone to throwing them away because they could repair them more easily. The fast fashion industry thrives off impulse purchases. The sustainable fashion industry is trying to combat this by creating places where you can go to make sure an item fits and have it ordered custom to your liking, so that way there is no inventory, but you can still try on the clothing. Technology and sustainability go hand in hand. As technology becomes more and more accessible, so does access to sustainability. The key to getting people to shop sustainably is by getting them to appreciate the clothing they own rather than seeing it as disposable. Using social media and virtual classes, sustainable brands have been able to show the roots of their sustainability. Secondhand shopping and wardrobe rental have also gained popularity in the last 20 years. Fashionopolis reminded me of the book The Paradox of Choice, which discusses maximizers and satisficers. Maximizers are concerned with finding and purchasing the best thing they can find, while satisficers are concerned with whatever is good enough. However, Dana Thomas seems to take a maximizer approach to the fashion industry, where she believes we should buy something once that is high quality rather than buying something mediocre that won't last a very long time. Jeans are a great example of this. Most of the jeans that people own have been made by a person in a factory in deadly slave-like working conditions, and these jeans also contain synthetic indigo dye that contains cancer-causing agents. I am just as guilty of this as anyone. None of my jeans come from a sustainable brand because it is not as accessible as buying them from a fast fashion brand. This concept can be applied to any clothing item. A white t-shirt from Walmart is in fact good enough. It gets the job done, but it might be costing a person in Bangladesh their life. A white t-shirt made by a brand such as Alabama Chain-In might be much more expensive, but it is higher quality, it is more comfortable, it will last longer, and it is providing the income for a freelance seamstress in Nashville. Appreciating the clothing we own is a good thing. If we start taking a maximizing approach to what goes on our bodies, it will ultimately benefit us, the world, and the people around us. Dana Thomas gives some tips near the end of her book as to how we can combat this cycle that has become all too normalized. She says to shop your closet. Look and see what you have before buying something new. The chances are you probably have something similar. Look into secondhand stores, thrift stores. There are endless options available because vintage clothing has become popularized over the last 20 years. Looking at online secondhand stores is also a more sustainable way to shop. Finally, learn how to sew and repair and redesign your own clothing. Rather than throwing away clothes that aren't trendy anymore, think of ways you can make them trendy now. By doing these things, you will be making the fashion industry more sustainable and eco-friendlier, as well as more ethical.